Now they have somebody who's an Indian as FATF's vice president. So probably they now have the leverage to put Pakistan back into the grey list.
No single seat, no president or vice president can move a country into or off the FATF Grey List. Pakistan has taken quite significant efforts to exit the Grey List.
Arzu Abasova is a research analyst at Royal United Services Institute, London. She's also an expert on Financial Action Task Force affairs. She's joining us from London as we talk to her about the recent appointment of an Indian as the vice president at the FATF. We'll talk to her about the recent Indian media coverage where they're asking for Pakistan to be put back on the grey list as they now have their own vice president. We'll ask her if that is possible. Thank you so much for joining us. If we can start with a theoretical question, what powers does the FATF president or the vice president have?
Thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. So the FATF president or the vice president, they're kind of essentially the chairs of the body, the Financial Action Task Force. For those of the audience who wouldn't know about it, it's kind of the most powerful organization that no one or very little people have heard of. So what FATF does is FATF sets global standards. It famously has like 40 recommendations, and the countries are asked to implement these recommendations, and then the FATF really monitors the countries against the standards, either through peer reviews or follows up, and then flags if any of the countries have serious deficiencies. So the FATF's goal is to set the standards against anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, and counter-proliferation financing. What is important to note is that the standards that they oversee are formally non-binding, but the countries really make like a political legal commitment to really implement these standards very well. So formally to your question, what FATF president does is they chair the plenary, they set a 2-year strategic priority so they can set their own goals and they can set the agenda. Currently, the FATF president is UK, which has assumed this role in the last 2 months. So the UK presidency, for example, has prioritized issues such as fraud, risk-based supervision, information sharing. Every president can set the agenda and will set the agenda and prioritize certain topics over the other ones. But that would be mostly, the power that they would have. Also alongside, representing FATF and kind of leading the meetings, leading the plenary sessions, and different actions that FATF really undertakes.
So UK is currently the president of FATF, and if they do not have good relations with Iran, hypothetically speaking, can the UK presidency influence FATF against Iran?
No, because UK would be one country, and one country cannot really, push to change the whole agenda. What the president would have is they would have a powerful microphone. As I said, they could really set the agenda, but they really don't have the remote control.
What do you mean by setting the agenda?
The setting the agenda, is prioritizing certain topics over the other ones. For example, currently the topic of fraud is prioritized. Like 2 years before, it was not that much prioritized, at least to say, which means that in the next 2 years, the UK presidency will do its best to highlight the topic, to do like more research on it, to push for more standards around it, or to make sure that there's more cooperation and coordination around the topic. Setting the agenda means, pushing certain topics, whichever the president, the assuming president thinks, they want to work on or they want to prioritize, then those topics become at the forefront of the agenda.
And what role does the vice president have?
The vice president has similar roles in a sense that it could also help shaping this agenda, also chairing those meetings, chairing the plenary sessions, and overall, making sure that they are externally representing FATF.
So I asked you this question because, there has been a recent development that FATF's vice president is from India now, and there have been multiple reports in Indian media, even state-level functionaries. They've mentioned that now they have somebody who's an Indian as FATF's vice president. So probably they now have the leverage to put Pakistan back into the grey list. And I want to ask you if that is technically possible.
I mean, procedurally and technically, no single seat, no president or vice president can move a country into or off the FATF grey list. Perhaps to understand this, we have to take a bit of a pedal back and understand how the whole process of grey listing happens. And the process runs through this kind of body called International Cooperation Review Group, in other words, the ICRG group, and it's a technical body that does the work. So what happens is that every country is periodically assessed in a detailed like mutual evaluation report, both looking at their technical compliance as well as looking at their effectiveness of their policies in practice. And if a country is identified that they have certain deficiencies, then FATF gives them around, let's say, like a 1 year of observation period so that they could work on these deficiencies. If a country cannot, work on these deficiencies or cannot make sure that all of the deficiencies are closed and they've reached or achieved certain developments, then this ICRG group that I mentioned kind of comes into the conversation. They examine where the big strategic deficiencies rely, meaning that where the gaps that are serious enough to pose a risk to the international financial system are. And based on this, then the ICRG group and the country itself that is in question, they come together and they agree on an action plan. What the action plan is kind of list of items that the country wants to the country needs to do to achieve certain reforms. And then after the action plan is negotiated, plenary comes together, which happens 3 times a year. It's either in February, June, or October. And then the situation is discussed at the plenary, and country is put then on FATF's grey list. So this is a very perhaps long way of saying that it's a very long and technically detailed and complex process. So it's not up to one country, just to push the other country to be on a grey list, but it's a series of events that is multiplied by technical assessments and effectiveness assessments of the countries that a country might end up in a situation like a grey list.
So your own research looks at the misuse of FATF standards. In your own research, have you come across some examples where FATF has been used for political considerations, or all the assessments are all done through technical parameters?
That's a great question. Thank you very much. As I mentioned previously, FATF is notionally a technical body that sets the standards. So technically speaking, it should not be affected by any kind of turmoil of geopolitics. It should not be politicized at all. But we are seeing that in recent years, as the FATF has, FATF decisions or the grey listings take quite a lot of prominence, we are seeing that the countries, would like to use their profile, or they would like to, push for their agendas. So this is kind of something that could be observed. But the extent of politicization is really open to debate, because the FATF's nature of decision making is pretty much closed, and the deliberations are very much closed. And as someone, as a researcher sitting outside and researching FATF, it would be very hard to claim that any process was made based on some kind of politics. So whatever we could say would be probably like speculation rather than pinpointing to actual and exact facts. That being said, there has been circumstances that, sitting once again from the outside, you could kind of see that how it would align with certain political processes or not. And I could give one example to it, particularly from 2016, back when Iran was one of the countries that was blacklisted. Just to explain blacklisting in one sentence, blacklist is a public warning that public warning by FATF, let's say, that certain countries are weak in their anti-money laundering or counter-terrorist financing, so that the banks and the investors are aware of it, and they should treat them with high risk and potentially, avoid doing business with them. So at the time, Iran was blacklisted, but as the conversations around the nuclear deal were progressing, FATF kind of entered this period where it suspended Iran's blacklist status for an initial period of 12 months in light of obviously all of the conversations. And the argument at the time was that they will work on their any kind of strategic deficiencies that were addressed, and ensure that that their anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing system is back and strong. But that really did not happen in the process that it showed us, and we could see the re-blacklisting of Iran in 2020. And if you look at it, perhaps once again from the outside, you would think that it didn't really happen within a vacuum, because it's broadly aligned with the processes and the hardening of the policy towards Tehran, particularly in the Western conversations. Once again, it is very hard to speculate in a sense that how much any of these conversations are politicized or not. But sometimes we can see, certain actions happening that are aligned with political circumstances that are happening elsewhere.
So, as you mentioned, there are signals or inklings of political influence in the decision making. Countries might lobby against other countries and get them sanctioned. So, the FATF advisories, or whenever they put a country into a grey list, for example, when Pakistan was put into the grey list, according to Pakistan's own estimates, it lost tens of billions of dollars because of FATF grey listing, and it comes with a lot of repercussions. So, what avenue does a country have if it is proven that they were added to the grey list or to the blacklist, and that decision was politically influenced? Is there a recourse for that country?
I would say short and simple answer is no. Perhaps a little bit longer answer is perhaps once again no, because FATF is not a treaty organization and it doesn't have a court that you can appeal to. And once again, the grey listing decisions are not taken by one country, and there's a formal mechanism, around how a country gets grey listed. So the answer to your question would probably be no. But what governments can do is they could ask for, more transparent decision making and kind of safeguards against any kind of like political influence.
Why isn't this decision making not transparent? Why?
I think decision making is becoming more and more transparent. I'm not claiming that decision making is not transparent, but obviously, if a country has certain thinking or certain concerns that a certain decision making has not been transparent, then they could kind of build coalitions inside to just push for certain reforms, just to make sure that any decision that FATF is undertaking is very much transparently discussed with them. Obviously, there are also countries that are FATF members, and there are countries who are part of the regional bodies, and it would be right now, I think there's particularly a lot of push just to involve more of the countries from the regional bodies to just come and sit at the plenaries and see the situation, just to ensure that there's more of like this transparency, and there's more of seeing how this decision making is happening.
So, I want your assessment on Pakistan's efforts to curb money laundering and terror financing. Pakistan completed a 34-point action plan, 2 action plans, in fact, and it exited the grey list in 2022. How would you rate Pakistan's performance? Because it involved a lot of evaluation, mutual evaluations, visits to the country. So, how would you assess Pakistan's performance?
As you mentioned, there's been 2 different action plans that Pakistan had to undertake and satisfy. The first one was a 27-point action plan on terrorist financing, and the second one was a 7-point money laundering action plan. And those plans were very broad as far as I have been aware of them. They were very broad, covering quite a lot of areas in Pakistan. So putting it into perspectives and into what I know from different countries that I have worked in, I think there's a couple of things that stand out, particularly in Pakistan's effort. First is the scale of the legislative changes. As I said, the action plan items really covered a lot of broad areas, and Pakistan pushed for over 10 laws to be amended to meet the technical compliance, and that takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of legal effort, takes a lot of coordination by different parts of the government. Second, I would claim the pace. Obviously, dealing with a very long list of action plan items is not an easy task, and considering the items and what was asked, I believe Pakistan did quite took quite quick steps, ensuring that ensuring that they reached most of the action plan items quite quickly. And third, I think, is the political cost, because from my experience with previous countries as well, it is very hard to sustain a political will and political kind of direction for several years to ensure that the country gets delisted, and that is why it's very important to sustain that level of reform over several years under the pressure of grey listing, and it's not an easy task for any kind of government. So that being said, Pakistan has taken quite significant efforts to exit the grey list.
Arzu Abasova, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.